You know, we talk about the heart. Back in the 1800s, if a young man wanted to date a young lady, quite often he would have to get permission from the parents to go and date her in the parlor. You know, that was the only place that was really considered appropriate. You were not to be out in certain places, and things were rather strict. So this one young man, he was told that this girl he wanted to date really enjoyed the sort of poetic phrases and, you know, words that were sweet nothings. And he said, well, can you tell me a couple? He asked a friend. He says, well, I can think of a couple. You can tell her that, her teeth sparkle like the stars that come out at night. And then he says, you could also say that when I'm with you and I look at your face, it seems that time just stands still. So he gets her in the parlor and he's trying to think of the first one. He said, your teeth are like the stars. They come out at night. And that didn't quite work out right. So he tried to correct himself. He said, when I look at your face, it reminds me that your face would stop a clock. So he didn't quite get it right, but at least he had good intentions. And isn't that the way it is with us in our hearts? Sometimes we have good intentions, but it doesn't come out the way we want to. Let's look then at a verse or two. We read in Proverbs chapter 3, my son, don't forget my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. And then in verse 3, he also talks about the heart again. He says about God's precepts, write them upon the table of thine heart. And then in verse 5, he says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart. So again, God is concerned what we think and what we believe. And what is our heart except our mind, our will, and the real purpose that we have inside? Now, in Matthew 26, 20 and 21, Jesus said, do not store up for yourselves treasures in the heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Men for ages have looked for buried treasure, sunken treasure. Treasure that is illicit treasure, that's sometimes in odd places. But Jesus knew that it's not upon this earth that treasures can be saved, but rather our heart is that which is important. Now I want to talk to you about three people today, and the first of these is Judas Iscariot. I want to ask you this question, like is said in the song title of the movie Moulin Rouge, which of course came out in 1952, where is your heart? Well, I want to ask you this question, where is your heart today? Is it really truly dedicated to the Lord? Or are you like Judas, maybe, whose heart, it seems, was almost from the beginning very dark and morose? Let's notice when it came to the matter of the perfume that mentioned in John 12, 4 through 8. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was intending to betray him, said, why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor people? Now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief, and as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. Doesn't sound like a man whose heart is truly dedicated to Jesus, does it? And I want you to notice this phrase right here. It said, who was intending to betray him? We see even at this point that perhaps Judas' mind was upon betraying his Lord, even though it's not even the Last Supper yet. He hasn't even gone to the chief priests and asked for 30 pieces of silver. So it seems that his heart quite early was very definitely beginning to be set against Jesus. Notice what it said about Judas. And Satan entered into Judas, who was called Iscariot. Notice this is just before the betrayal of his Lord. Belonging to the number of the 12, and he went away and discussed with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them. They were glad and agreed to give him money. So he consented and began seeking a good opportunity to betray him to them apart from the crowd. That being apart from the crowd was the real secret. It wasn't that they didn't know who Jesus was. It wasn't that they didn't know what they wanted to do to him, but they wanted an opportunity to get him away from the crowd. And who would they need to know who would do that? One of the apostles. Who would know his schedule? Who would know where to find him in a dark hour of the night so that betrayal would lead to arrest, and that arrest would, of course, lead to his trial and later crucifixion. You say, no, wait a minute. What does it mean Satan entered Judas? Well, that's not to say that Satan hadn't been there before. After all, we know that Satan is always there at any time with any given person to make a temptation in our behalf, isn't he? But Satan is not an overpowering force. He's not someone that can enter into your heart and take it over without your control. Now, there was a period I believe in the first century and earlier, where demons were able to possess the physical bodies of people. I have no doubt that those things are true, and those supernatural occurrences were something that were only under the control of God at that time. And Jesus would cast out demons, or devils, as the King James Version calls them. And that's not because that it was done because God hated these people, but I think it's so that God could show the power through His Son Jesus. Others may have let themselves become tempted of evil and gradually given themselves over to demons and devils. We don't know all the ins and outs of that particular subject. But Satan is always there to enter into any given person's heart, just like he entered into Judas' heart. And Judas wanted to betray his Lord. Notice what it tells us toward the Last Supper. Now when evening was come, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12 disciples. As they were eating, he said, "Truly I say to you that one of you will betray me." Being then deeply grieved, they began to say to him, "Surely not I, Lord." And he answered, "He who dipped his hand with me in the bowl is the one who will betray me." And clearly that would be Judas. Jesus knew what would happen. It says he knew what was in man. I fully believe that Jesus could read the minds and hearts of all people. I believe that he had that supernatural ability as the Son of God to know exactly what people were thinking. You know, he still knows what we're thinking today. And I believe that even in this crowd today, there may be some, and we would perish the thought, hope that's not the case, but it might be that someone here has even been thinking about, well, I'm kind of growing disenchanted with Christianity. I'm not so sure I'm going to continue to be part of the Lord's church. Well, God knows that too. He knows that you're going through those temptations and feelings. He doesn't want that to be the case. He's hoping that you will win out, that your heart, mind, soul will be dedicated to Him. But He knows that, just like He knew what was happening to Judas. But Judas, again, was going to have to fulfill his role, and he could have changed had he wanted to, but it wasn't his desire to do so. We remember as he brought that crowd in on the night that Jesus was there in the garden. It said, while he was speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, came up accompanied by a large crowd, and with swords and clubs, who came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he was betraying him, gave them a sign, saying, "Whomever I kiss, he's the one. Seize him." Well, you remember Judas goes up to identify Jesus in the dark of the night. And he says, "Hail, Rabbi," and kissed him. And Jesus says, "Friend, do what you come for." Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. You see, there's no doubt that Judas is going to follow through with this. His heart is completely turned toward what is his task, the malevolent task that he has about. Satan has won the battle in Judas' heart, hasn't he? At least for this moment he has. But we know that that isn't the end of the story of Judas. We know that once he realized he had made a mistake, it said Judas, when he betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned after he'd been upon the trial, I'm sure. He felt remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders and said, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What is that to us? See to that yourself." And he threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed. And he went away and hanged himself. You see, this is the kind of remorse that's not repentance. It's simply just sorrow. If he had really had godly sorrow, he would have gone and asked for forgiveness after Jesus' resurrection. He would say, "Oh, I'll go to the apostles and ask forgiveness, or I will pray to God for forgiveness of my sins." But none of that happened, you see. He decided that it was too late. He had committed what he considered in his own life the unpardonable sin. That's a strange thing about sin. You get to a point when you've given yourself over to it so completely that you feel there is no alternative. But that's never the case. I've said it many a time. Where there's life, there's hope. Now let's look at the second person. Let's look at Simon Peter. What about his heart? Well, we see Judas was completely turned against God, except for that last image we have. He has remorse for selling his Lord and betraying him, but again does nothing about it.